Hey, everybody, welcome and thank you for hopping on board the latest edition of Gun on One. It is powered by the Inside the Birds Network. I'm Derrick Gunn. That man right there, you won't find a better journalist slash reporter who covers the Philadelphia Eagles in this market. I've known him a long time. I love his work. I'm glad to call him a friend. He is the one and only Zach Berman from PHLY. He's the author of a new book that just came out in September. The franchise Philadelphia Eagles came out September 24th. It covers the last 25 years of the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But, Zach, we got to start at the beginning, man. I mean, this Eagles team just can't lose. And they proved Sunday against a very good Pittsburgh team that we can beat you in more than one ways.
Yeah, well, I should say first off, thanks for having me on. It's always good to speak with you, D Gun. It's a pleasure of mine. So you're absolutely right, and the versatility of the team, the ability to play, like you said, different styles. What they've had games obviously where you've seen them win on the ground. This was a game where they won through the air. The diversity of the offense in terms of, they played more empty this game than they have any game this season. I mean, they had more passing yards out of empty than the past 7 games combined. The consistency of the defense, it stands out, and that's a tough team. You know that well. You know Pittsburgh well, right? Yeah. For them to win by double digits against the Steelers, a team that can often dictate the tempo of a game. For them, in speaking to Lane Johnson after the game, Lane referred to like certain measuring stick games, and when they beat the Ravens the way they did, they beat the Steelers here. That says something. The way they're look, every win's important. I get that, but when you're able to beat these teams that are playoff caliber teams and beat them in a real decisive way, I think that speaks quite a bit about the type of team that you have.
You just mentioned Lane Johnson, and after the game, he talked about how he didn't focus as much on the Steelers' defense as he did on one-on-one situations with that guy named T.J. Watt, who had 9.5 sacks coming in. Yeah. He's going to be a first-ballot Hall of Famer. TJ, he got his couple of sacks, but for the most part, Lane does what Lane does. He basically shuts down some of the best edge rushers in the National Football League. Even at this stage of his career, that man is still impressive.
Yeah, and I hope Eagles fans realize how rare it is to have 2 offensive tackles who play on an island the entire game. First off, we just spoke about empty. You can't really play empty if you need the chip. Right. An edge rusher. So you're trusting these guys one-on-one. But what it allows you to do offensively when you have Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata. But let's talk about Lane here. He's been doing this now. I've covered his entire career. So for 12 years now, he does this on a consistent basis. Like, we all know what the record is when he's not in there. Yeah. But so you see how valuable he is when he's not in there. But when you face someone like TJ Watt, who, as Lane said, like can absolutely wreck a game. This guy stands out on film when you watch it. For Lane to play as he did, it's what makes this offense go, is that offensive line. I mean, they have wide receivers that are the envy of the league. They have the guy who's been the best running back in the NFL this year. Mm-hmm. Jalen's a high caliber quarterback, but it starts at the line of scrimmage. And if this offensive line doesn't play the way they do, and it's anchored by Lane Johnson, then they're not the offense that they are and that they need to be in January.
I want to go back before the game. And of course, it all started off the week before, when AJ and Devontae mentioned the passing game needed to improve. And then, of course, Brandon Graham said what he said, and that started a firestorm the whole week. As you got ready to watch that game on Sunday, what was the one thing you wanted to see most? For me, it was to see team body language when they came out. What was it for you?
Yeah, I mean, mine from a football perspective, I wanted to see them pass the ball, and not as a response to what AJ said, but because of the way I expected the Steelers to play. Like, here's an example, okay? Saquon Barkley said that he had met Mike Tomlin one time before this, and that was when the Giants played the Steelers. And they spoke on the field before the game, and the only thing Tomlin said is it's going to be a long night for you. Well, that night, Saquon Barkley had 15 carries for 6 yards, okay?
Woo.
You knew going into the game, the way the Steelers play, they were going to bottle up the run. That was going to be their game plan. You also knew they play a lot of single high safety. They play a lot of man coverage on early downs, that there were going to be opportunities to pass the ball. So the narrative aside, that's what the matchup dictated. And then you add in the narrative and the fact that, look, I thought the questions about the passing game, they were merited because the reality was the Eagles, they weren't passing the ball well in those previous 2 games in particular. You look at the yards per attempt. But also, it was never about what it would take to beat Carolina. It was about what it would take to win in January. And to win in January, they needed a better passing offense. And that's not me saying it. That's the players saying it, and that's people elsewhere in the league that you talk to saying it. So I really wanted to see if their passing offense could take advantage of the opportunity against Pittsburgh. And you saw it from the opening drive. And like when AJ and Devontae were targeted on that opening drive, it's like, all right, game on. These guys are ready.
Were you surprised they came out and threw the ball the first 3 plays of the game?
No, that was what I expected. That was what I expected the game plan to be based on the Steelers. And look, if they tried running into that Pittsburgh front, given the way Pittsburgh was playing them, I would say they were being hard-headed. Like, this is why you have A.J. Brown. This is why you have Devontae Smith. This was their opportunity, and they took advantage of it.
You look at Jalen, and, there are people that are still indifferent towards him. But you look at what he's done over this 10-game winning streak. 8 of the 10 games, his passer rating has been over 100. It was 125 Sunday. It was 25 of 32 for 290 yards. Of course, he hasn't come close to throwing for 290 yards in quite some time. Do you think people in general, and I'm talking mostly about the outside media, seems to have this, I don't want to use the word hatred, but difference of opinion about Jalen and where he is. Is he a good quarterback? Is he an average quarterback? Is he approaching elite status? Do you think it's time for people to get off his back in general who don't really watch what he's doing week in and week out?
Well, look, I mean, the fact that he keeps ending up in the winner's circle, and he's done this going back to college. He's done this throughout his NFL career.
Yeah.
As Jalen would say, when does winning stop mattering, right? And so you start there, and then but then Jalen also says you have to play to a standard. Now, if I'm being honest, I thought the previous 2 games, not the entirety of the season, but the previous 2 games in particular, I didn't think the passing offense was where it needed to be. And
Right.
Jalen would tell you that, and AJ would tell you that, and Devontae would tell you that. But by and large, yeah, I mean, I think Jalen makes winning plays throughout the game. I think that he's done a real good job this year managing the game. You look at the way they play in 4-minute offense, right? That doesn't show up in the stat sheet often, but the way they can finish the game with the ball in their hands, a lot of that goes into Jalen. The fact that they haven't been turning the ball over during this 10-game winning streak, right? Now they had a shift clearly during that bye week, and in the 10 games since, Jalen for the first, for the most part was doing what he needed to do. I keep pointing to the 2 previous games before this, when like the Carolina game, they won, but Jalen wasn't playing that well. That when you were, I should say, passing as well as he needed to. But as far as the criticism for Jalen Hurts, especially that the criticism that comes outside of Philly, look, Jalen has this pair of cleats that's called heavy as the head. It's an expression that he's used with me a number of times. I remember sitting in a small interview session with him before the 2023 season, and I was kind of talking about everything, all the pressure that was on him with the contract, with the playing toe-to-toe, probably outdoing even Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl, all the eyes on him, and he said heavy as the head, right? And so that's what comes with that position, is that when you have a game like he had Sunday, you get a lot of praise. When you have a game like he had the previous week, you get a lot of, whether it's blame or criticism or scrutiny. So that comes with the position. But ultimately, as he would tell you too, pressure is a privilege. And I think that he's up there with the top quarterbacks in the league, and he's earned that. And the fact that, he talks about playing to a standard. I've seen him be the best quarterback in the Super Bowl. The fact that he's
Wow.
done that is it shows that he can hit that standard, and so that you want to get to that again, and you want to get to that on a consistent basis.
It's amazing how the dynamic of this team works. I can't remember who said it, but they said that this is a team that fights within, but you can't outfight them on the football field. They have their differences of opinion behind closed doors, but once they hit the gridiron, they're a machine. They're unstoppable. From your perspective, can anybody stop this team? Or do you only stop them? Or can they only stop themselves?
Well, no, my answer is yes. Look, they're playing really well. There's no doubt about that. But this is a matchup league, as you well know, and you can face a coordinator who gives you a hard time. You can face a quarterback who gives you a hard time. So yeah, I'm not. I thought they were going to split the Baltimore-Pittsburgh games. Clearly, that did not happen,
Yeah.
right? And you give them credit, but you look, if they play Buffalo in a neutral field, if they play Detroit in Detroit, look, I imagine there's a lot of curiosity about how they'll look against Todd Bowles' defense. That's kind of been kryptonite in the times that they played. So this is a matchup league, and yeah, I don't think you can get ahead of yourself to say that they can only beat themselves, because there's going to be games there where there's a quarterback who makes a lot of plays on them, or there's a defense that is kind of getting the best of this offense. And the thing about football is it's not a 7-game series, right? You have to look good that day. And so, yeah, I think they can be beaten, but I think, there's maybe 6 teams in the league that I would say can win the Super Bowl, and the Eagles are one of those teams.
Man for man, are they the best team in the league right now?
I think they're the best team in the NFC,
NFC,
especially
okay.
given the injuries. And I pause there because, look, this well, is when you do this job, like the way I do it, you're not watching every team in the league with the same. So I have I'm obsessed every day
Okay.
with covering the Eagles. So I haven't watched the Buffalo Bills other than their national games or the crossover games they have against Eagles opponents. I see what I see what Josh Allen's doing. I see the points they put up against Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be impressed with that. I saw Detroit quite a bit before these injuries, and I said, "Wow, that team's really impressive." But now you lose Aleem McNeil, and they already lost Aiden Hutchinson. They've lost their entire linebacker core. That changes things quite a bit. But I thought going into the season, this Eagles team was loaded offensively. What I didn't expect was the defense to be what they are now, and it's so impressive to me because this is the best defense that I've covered in my 13 years covering the team.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is it's in a different way. There's not like, now Jalen Carter's an outstanding player, but it's not like there's that defensive player of the year candidate like Hassan Reddick was in 2022. It's not like they have like the depth on the defensive line like that 2017 team had. They're so solid in a meat and potatoes way. Like every spot on the team, on the every level plays well. They play well together. They tackle well. They cover well. They rush well together. And it's a credit to Vic Fangio, and Howie Roseman put together a hell of a roster as well.
Hey, does the offense carry the defense, or does the defense carry the offense with this team?
Well, through the 14 games this year, I would say the defense has carried them more.
Okay.
That if you're not scoring if the other team's not scoring into the 20s, you have a lot of chance of winning games. And you look at Baltimore. Baltimore's lights out on offense, and the Eagles kept them in check. Now I know Pittsburgh isn't an electric offense, but Pittsburgh only scored 13 points. Now that said, it's you hear the term complimentary football, but it truly is, because it takes both sides. Now, what impresses me so much about the defense is the way they play situationally. So take, for instance, The offense struggled. I shouldn't say struggled early in the game, but there were 2 turnovers, offense and special teams. The Pittsburgh had 2 short fields. They had 3 points to show off it,
Mhm.
right? You look at some of these games that they had, the Baltimore game, the way they
Right.
played on third down in that game. Um, they've had games this year where they've given up yards, but the red zone defense is critical. So situational football, they've been so good defensively. So I don't want to say the defense is carrying the offense because look, Saquon Barkley might be the MVP or the offensive player of the year. AJ Brown, Devontae Smith are the MVP of the league, a wide receiver. That offensive line, we already discussed that. But I think of the 2 units, I think the defense has probably been the better unit. And I wouldn't have expected that going into the season.
When you talk about MVPs, there's no question Saquon is at the head of the heap for a lot of reasons across the National Football League. But let's face it, Zach, running backs get disrespected when it comes to that award. The last running back to win it was back in 2012. It was, Adrian Peterson. What else does he have to do to solidify? Does he actually have to break Eric Dickerson's record before he can honestly say that award is mine?
I think he has to play quarterback, honestly. I think that's look. This season, Josh Allen's having a Buffalo. You can't take anything away from him. But Saquon's done everything and more. And like the numbers he's putting up, it's incredible. Going into this past game, he had 2 more 100-yard rushing games than any player in the NFL. He's had more 100-yard rushing games than the previous 3 years under Nick Sirianni combined. Just this season, he's running against teams that don't allow running yards, that don't allow rushing yards. And he's like the Eagles' offense was already their rushing offense. These past 2 years, past 3 years, really. They had 1,000-yard rushers. They had Pro Bowl rushers, Miles Sanders, DeAndre Swift, and he's been a major upgrade there. He's carried this offense. Yeah, he should be offensive player of the year this year, an MVP candidate. He's absolutely an MVP candidate. But to answer the question succinctly, what does he need to do? He needs to play quarterback because it tends to be a quarterback award. Now, look, the Heisman Trophy tends to be a quarterback award, and a quarterback didn't win it this year. But I think it's going to be hard to knock Josh Allen off that perch with the way he's playing. And Josh Allen's probably earned that award as well.
You cover this team day in and day out. And of course, AJ, leading up to this game, basically came out and said, if I have to be the heavy, if I have to be the bad guy to hold people accountable with this team, I'm willing to do it. Do you like AJ's openness in terms of he spilled the beans that they weren't happy with the passing game? And he says, look, I'm willing to be the heavy to make sure we're all on the same page and this train is moving in the same direction.
Yeah, I do. Look, AJ Brown was asked what the offense needed to improve. He said passing.
Yep.
If he didn't say passing, I would say you're being disingenuous, right? Look, they had their fewest yards per attempt of any game this season. AJ Brown had his fewest amount of. I'm talking about the Carolina game.
Yep.
AJ Brown had the fewest amount of targets going into the fourth quarter than any game in his Eagles career. It was an obvious statement to make. And I think it's okay to be honest. Like I look, and I get him saying that from a reporter perspective, but even it's healthy from a team perspective, in my opinion. And I'll give you an example of last year. In 2023, the Eagles started 10-1, right?
Yep.
There were problems that were festering that I think were swept under the rug. And it was swept under the rug under the guise of we know how to win. That's what they kept saying. They know how to win. Well, if there's problems that keep coming up and you're escaping these games, eventually it's going to get you. And by the way, Jalen Hurts, he said it after that Carolina game, it doesn't get you until it gets you, right? And you saw that in 2023. And I think it's real important to be honest, to have those conversations. If I'm doing bad shows, if I'm writing bad articles, I can try to fool other people. I know, and it's only going to get better unless I address it. And it needed, there were issues there with the passing game that needed to be addressed. And so, I don't think it's being the bad guy saying, I think it's being the honest person. And I think that there's so often in
Mm.
football locker rooms. Maybe it's other workplaces too, but I cover football for a living. You try so hard to kind of be diplomatic or politically correct, or you don't want to say anything that's like remotely interesting.
Mhm.
And sometimes when you do that, you convince yourself that there's not a problem. And I think instead of sweeping things under the rug,
Yep.
put it out there, fix it, and get better from it. And that's what they did.
Do you think Jalen's ability to not tell the media much of anything, um, that's just his demeanor, or is he being well guarded because of how he's been criticized and attacked in this city?
Well, look there. He played under Nick Saban, so
Yep. Yep.
there's the rat poison element to it. But I actually think
Yep.
Jalen's been a little more, you know, honest and
Mhm.
vulnerable, if you will, this year than he's been in some past years. And I don't want to put too much on what a player says publicly.
Mhm.
Um, as long as you're being honest and not as long as you're being honest behind the scenes, especially. But I think when Jalen speaks, Jalen's not speaking to the person asking the question. He's
Right.
speaking to the camera. He's got a well-crafted public image. I get that. But I think that there are I do think he's been more honest and accessible in terms of and revealing this year than he's been certainly last year. And I think there were times last year where it was I don't want to say that he was he was fooling himself.
Right. Right.
But I think, like I said, there were problems last year that I think were swept under the rug. And I think sometimes whether you want to say it publicly or you're confronting it privately,
Mhm.
but there are things that needed to be confronted. And I think Jalen's been better with that, especially in the past few weeks.
He sat down at the podium right after the game, and before you guys even got to ask a question, he said, "So that's what y'all wanted to see, huh?"
Hmm.
Now, we always talk about teams going into games trying to make a statement game, so on
Yeah.
and so forth. Do you think that comment alone basically was telling you guys this was our statement game, so you guys can be quiet about us not being able to beat teams in many different ways?
Yeah, I do, and I think he earned it. Right?
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
a, he, he's allowed to say it when you play as well as he did, and facing the questions that he did a week ago, and not just the questions from the media, the questions from his own locker room, right? Or I shouldn't say the questions, but the comments from his own locker room. But yeah, when you play like that, you're allowed to strut, and he strutted
Mhm.
and he earned it.
Mhm. When you look at this defense, I don't think anybody, being honest with themselves, thought with them having the youngest starting 11 defensive personnel in the National Football League, that they will be sitting at the lofty perch of the number one defense in the league,
Mm.
and they're consistently holding opponents under 20 points. Has this defense even surprised you in some ways, and if so, how?
Oh, in a significant way. Um, I thought when they hired Vic Fangio, I thought what it did was it raised the floor more than it raised the ceiling, right?
Okay.
So
All
I
right.
thought when they hired him, like you're not going to have a bottom of the league defense anymore, but
Mm-hmm.
you might not have a top league. Like you're going to have a competent defense. And I thought going into the year, all right, you have a competent defense under Vic Fangio,
Yep.
and you have the offensive talent that they have. They're going to be a really good team. And I didn't expect a top 5 defense. And there's a few factors here. First off, um, like linebacker play has been outstanding. That's made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they expected that, right? Devin White was supposed to be the top linebacker or starting linebacker this year.
Yep.
Zach Bond wasn't signed to be the number one guy, but Zach Bond earned it. Like
Mm.
credit to Vic Fangio from the spring. Zach Bond was in that spot and he played like it from the spring. N'Kobe really came on late during the summer. N'Kobe Dean came on late during the summer and earned that job over Devin White. And the two of them have been terrific together. Zach Bond's been an all-pro caliber linebacker, which I haven't really said that during my 13 years here, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Um, I didn't expect that you would draft a cornerback from Toledo, and
Yeah.
he would go on and become what he's become, right? I didn't. I thought there would be a little bit more of a learning curve there, and Quinyon Mitchell has been a shutdown
Mhm.
corner for the Eagles, and so it really is that has raised the ceiling in a major way. I look at this too from the perspective of the defensive front, and they don't have a lot of depth there, as much depth as they have in the past. But I've also been conditioned to covering a team that rotates guys, and that's not Vic Fangio's way. So seeing Jalen Carter, he's in much better shape than he was, or he's better
Mhm.
conditioned than he was a year ago. He can play every snap, and he's just been such a force. But really, the way they play together has, and Vic Fangio has been outstanding. So yeah, I have not, I did not. This defense far exceeded what I anticipated going into the year.
You know what, Zaquan Mitchell in particular, I mean, he doesn't even have a full season under his belt.
Yeah,
They don't even throw to his side. That's the
yeah,
ultimate respect in the National Football League. This young man, all the tools, hip movement, rotation, speed, backpedaling, ability to catch up. I mean, right now, and you're closer because you're at the stadiums. I don't see any flaw in his game. And again, he hasn't even completed one full year in the National Football League yet.
yeah. You hit it on the head. Really, the only thing you could say, I wouldn't even call it a flaw in the game, but an area where he can improve is the ball skills. Right?
Okay.
Is that, and he would tell you that, and the other corners would tell you that there are times when he's getting PBUs and they could be interceptions.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, he's been outstanding. He's been their top corner. He should be the rookie of the year this year.
Mm.
He's been a legit number one corner. And I liked him coming out, but I would admit I lean toward Terry and Arnold
Yeah.
between the two of them. And the reason is because I trust more of the SEC pedigree than the MAC
Right.
pedigree,
Right.
right? I thought Terry and Arnold was seeing better players. Terry and Arnold was younger, and I thought there was just more exposure to press coverage, to man coverage, than what Quinyon was doing. And Quinyon, to his credit, has taken to everything, and he was terrific during training camp. You've seen him from week one. The stage isn't too big. From what I understand, his practice habits, the way he is behind the scenes, spot on.
Mm.
The Eagles nailed this pick, and you could say the same thing about Cooper DeJean too.
Yes.
I mean, both of
Yes.
them. This has been a position where the Eagles have tried so many different ways to get corners.
Right.
Whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency, whether it's trades. And look, I mean, Slay and Bradbury were a real good combination for them in 2022. Bradbury obviously went down last year, regressed last year, but Quinyon and Cooper DeJean have given them something that I haven't covered in 13 years, which is a building block young cornerback.
Yes. Yes. I want you to, I'm going to put you on the spot. I want you to give me, in chronological order, your top 3 favorite defensive players to watch on this Eagles team.
Jalen Carter, number one.
Okay.
Because it's like watching, I remember in 2013, Fletcher Cox's second year, when you're like, man, this guy's gonna be one of the best players in the NFL. And that's what you see with Jalen Carter. Opponents start with number 98. Okay. I would say I'm gonna go Zach Bond too.
Yeah.
Just because he's all over the field. He plays linebacker differently than what I've seen during my time covering the team, where you're not trying to get by with him. He just makes plays. I tend to be an edge rusher guy. Like I love watching edge rushers. There's not really that edge rusher who I would like Josh Sweat's been really good, but I guess I would go Quinn. But this is the thing, when you watch Quinyon, like teams don't challenge him as much. So unless you're going back and watching the game, like he's just being so solid. So in terms of like when I'm at the game, someone else who jumps out. Look, in the past 2 weeks, I would say Nolan Smith has really impressed me. But I would go to I'll go Josh Sweat in there, because I think Josh Sweat's been a real productive pass rusher for them, and he probably doesn't get the credit that he deserves. He's been their top edge rusher.
I was thinking that Brandon Graham going down would have been a huge loss to the pass rushing of this defense. Yeah, to be honest with you, they haven't missed a beat. Nolan Smith has had more opportunities, taking advantage of it. Josh Sweat, is attacking with ferocity right now. Obviously, the two D tackles, Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, make a lot of that happen. A lot of what they do doesn't show up in the stats, but it helps free up a lot of people to do some other things. I think the edge rushing right now, it may not be deep, but I think they're fine at edge rushing right now.
Yeah, Nolan Smith in particular this past game, I thought it was the best game he played in an Eagles uniform. And look, he played almost every snap, which you don't typically see.
Right, right.
He's real physical. He's been that way since Georgia. I think there's a misconception because he's on the smaller side.
Yep.
That he's more of a finesse player. That's not his game. That wasn't his game at Georgia. A matter of fact, he kind of had to refine some of his pass rush moves and develop pass rush moves, but he's always been an effort physical player, and you're seeing that from him. Look, I still don't think that they have the edge rushers that really scare up. They don't have what Hassan Reddick was in 2022.
Yep.
They don't have, you mentioned like TJ Watt or Myles Garrett, that type of player. But they're making it work. And Brandon Graham was playing at such a high level this year in year 15. And they clearly miss him. When you miss it, when he's not out there, you miss him. But Nolan Smith's giving them good snaps. Alex Hunt has stepped in and given them solid snaps. You mentioned the deep tackles. I would also add Milton Williams in there. Milton Williams has done a real good job. But honestly, to me, the star of this defense is Vic Fangio, because I just feel, I think back to something that was said to me during the summer, which is everyone was talking about the Fangio scheme. And this is what in the comment that was made to me is you're making such a big deal about the scheme and not a big enough deal about the game plans. And it's spot on, because every week this team looks prepared.
Yep.
And so I bring that up because really the strength of the team is the team. Like the strength of the defense, it's not obviously Jalen Carter's a really good player, but it's not Carter or Bond or Mitchell. It's the whole group. They play so well together, and that goes right to Vic Fangio.
Their last three games are against division opponents. Washington, Dallas, and the Giants. And oh, by the way, they all rank 30th, 29th, 28th in pass in rush defense. Do you what Saquon didn't get against Pittsburgh? Do you think he makes up for in volumes against these last three opponents, or do you think these other three teams? Well, let's not even say the Giants. The Giants couldn't stop me or you running the football, so we don't count the Giants. But when it comes to Washington, Dallas, they make the concerted effort, as Pittsburgh did, to make sure they bottle up Saquon.
Good question. Saquon had that huge rushing game against Washington when they played against them. So I think I don't think those run defenses are going to challenge you the way Pittsburgh is, or the way Pittsburgh could. But yeah, I think teams are going to try to stop Saquon. But it's the Eagles can beat you through the air. They've already shown it. I'm curious to see how the Eagles manage Saquon here. Look, he's chasing history. He's still within he's still within fighting distance of that Eric Dickerson record. It would be a fascinating storyline going into Week 18 against the Giants, his former team, if he's in contention to break that record. But what I mean is you've seen Kenny Gainwell give them meaningful snaps. Will Shipley's a 4th round pick. I think that you want to make sure Saquon is fresh and in good spot going into the postseason. So I get the record's a big deal. It's a big deal for the offensive line. It's a big deal for Saquon, big deal for the organization. But I am curious to see if they manage him a little more over these past 3 weeks, especially because he got dinged up a bit against Pittsburgh.
Let me ask you this, because I've been talking about this for quite some time now. Let's say Saquon goes into their last game. It's a meaningless game against the Giants.
Yeah.
The seating position is already locked up. He needs about 100 yards to break the record.
Yeah.
Do you sit him? Do you let him go?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've wondered this too.
Yeah.
100 yards, I think they let him go. I think they let him go. I think and now if it's like $150, $180, I think they sit him. But look, Saquon would tell you that Saquon would tell you that he's not about the records, and he would
Yeah.
want it to be organic.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
but this is the thing: Detroit's loss last week changes things. So
Yes.
if the Eagles don't stumble now, if the Eagles lose one of these next two games, then I think there's a chance you could sit Saquon week
Mm.
13, but in week 18. But as long as they have a fighting chance of that one seed, um, and Saquon has a fighting chance of getting that record, they're going for it. And the one seed's too valuable too. So unless they stumble in these next two games,
Yep.
that Detroit loss last week changed so much for them.
Are you surprised at how healthy the Eagles are at this stage of the season? I mean, if they have a few nicks, aches, and pains,
Yeah.
but you look at a team like Detroit. They went into their game on Sunday against Buffalo, 13 players in IR. Then they lose two more, a D lineman, valuable D lineman, and David Montgomery with a torn MCL. I'm shocked at how healthy the Eagles are at this stage of the season. That just doesn't happen. And you look at the better teams across the National Football League, they've all lost key players.
Yeah, you're right. And look, some of this you could say is a credit to the Eagles training staff and the way they practice. But the reality is this: the injuries we're talking about aren't the soft tissue injuries that the
Right,
training
right.
staff can try to prevent. And if a guy tears his ACL, if a guy breaks his leg, I mean that there's nothing you can do to prevent that. Tears his Achilles, and the Eagles have been fortunate in that regard. And I think there is something to be said about injury luck. Now, you knock on wood in the sense that there's a lot of football left, right? And you never know what can happen here. But the Eagles have been able to avoid that by and large. Now, Dallas Goedert's a big injury. Brandon Graham's a big injury, right?
Yeah.
But Bryce Huff, in theory, should be a bigger injury than it is. But I mean, you look at Detroit, you look at San Francisco, you look at the teams that you expected to be the heavyweights this year. You even look at Kansas City.
Yeah.
There've been a lot. The Eagles are fortunate to be in this position, and I keep going back to what Dan Campbell said after the NFC Championship game last year, where he's like, you don't know if you're going to be back. It's really hard to be back, and we were both there in 2017,
Yes.
and the Eagles were remarkable that year in terms of overcoming some injury luck. But then we saw too, you probably thought that day you'd see Carson Wentz win a playoff game for the Eagles, or you would you go on down the list, you would see Alshon Jeffrey make a big catch in the playoffs again for the Eagles, and I mean it's hard. You just never know what's going to happen with injuries. When you have the opportunity, you got to take advantage of it, and things look good for the Eagles right now.
Not only are you covering football every day, and I remember years ago when you told me, D Gun, if I could, I would sleep at the NovaCare complex. I had never heard that statement before from anybody. So that tells you the passion that you have of covering the Philadelphia Eagles. But more importantly, you also have a passion for writing. And your latest book just came out September 24th, The Franchise Philadelphia Eagles, the last 25 years. Where in the world do you have time to write a book? A journalist, a husband, a father, and now successful author. How do you find the time?
I have a really understanding wife. Number one, it starts there. But no, I love this. I mean, I don't have hobbies. I'm quick to admit that. If I'm not working, I'm thinking about working, right? And I love being with my wife and kids, but they'll tell you too. I can't sit on a couch on a Saturday, and I don't want to say my least favorite time, but those 4 weeks during the summer when the Eagles offices are quiet, that's like the most boring time for me. I love when they report to training camp and I get to go there and I look forward to Wednesday more than I look forward to Friday, because Friday means it's the end of the week and Wednesday means I'm in the locker room for the next 3 days. So that's a roundabout way of saying that when something's important to you, you make time. And in writing this book was important to me, and I appreciate you asking me about it, because I think there's a lot in there that I lived this every day, but there's a lot in there that I didn't know. And then from the first 12 years, from the first 12 years of that 25-year period, I wasn't covering the team, and there's stuff in there that Jeffrey Lurie told me, for instance, we all know that New Orleans wanted to make that big trade with the Eagles, right? Back in 1999. Well, Jeffrey Lurie told me that actually the morning of the draft, Tom Benson, the late owner of the New Orleans Saints,
Yeah.
called Jeffrey Lurie directly and tried to making the deal with Jeffrey with that bounty of draft picks and future first-round picks to try to get up to number 2 to take Ricky Williams. And Jeffrey brought it into Andy Reid, and Andy Reid said any other year, yes, but this year he has conviction in the quarterback. Joe Banner told me that when Drew Brees was a free agent, the Eagles did their work on him and were interested in signing Drew Brees. It didn't work out because the Eagles quarterback situation was set, but they kind of viewed it as a situation where it's rare to have a quarterback like this hit the open market. So, yeah, I mean, I'm so curious about everything, but especially the Eagles, that this was a fun endeavor in that regard.
So how much research did you put into the book, and how much did you compile before the book went to publication?
Yeah, quite a bit. So there was a lot. So I had to use a lot of my notes from 13 years covering the team. At that point, 12 years.
Right.
But then I had to round it. I made a lot of calls to try to track people down. I should say I'm real grateful that Malcolm Jenkins wrote the foreword for the book. In my time covering the team, there's no one that you're not allowed to have favorites, right? But there's no one I respect more than Malcolm. And in terms of the way he carried himself, the type of leader he was, the type of player he was. And I'm so grateful for the time of those I spoke with, from like I said, Brian Westbrook to Trey Thomas to Jeffrey Lurie gave me I was appreciated his time, Joe Banner. So there's a lot of stuff in there that and then you do a lot of research. You read. I have this bookshelf behind me. This isn't for decoration. I mean, I've read every book up here, and so
you read all those books.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can go on down the list. I have you can't see it in this book, but I have a whole shelf of Eagles books, and I can tell you, I mean, Ray Didinger books, Doug Peterson books, book Doug Peterson wrote, the book Nick Foles wrote. I read a children's book that Zach Ertz wrote, a children's book, just to try to get nuggets from Zach Ertz that haven't been out there before. So yeah, I mean, I if you're curious, you don't put an end to your curiosity.
Do you have a clone or something? There's no way one man can do all the stuff that you do.
That's not, no. I don't sleep as much as I should, but I said, I mean, some people golf, some people fish, some people, I think about the Eagles and talk about the Eagles and write about the Eagles. That's what I like to do.
All right, I'm not going to take up too much more of your time, but I got to ask you. All right, coming up this Sunday, their last road game of the regular season. They're down the highway in the state of Maryland, taking on Washington Commanders in the rematch. How do you see that one playing itself out, or have you gotten that far yet to size up the pluses and minuses?
Yeah, the good thing about these NFC East games is that I've seen those teams, right? I mean, it makes my prep work less intense. I'm sure Washington's changed quite a bit, and there's some injuries you need to monitor, including Zach Ertz. He has a concussion, like you said. Yeah, I think the Eagles are the more talented team. I thought that going into the first Washington game. Dan Quinn's done a really good job this year coaching that group. Cliff Kingsbury, Joe Witt Jr., and then, Jaden Daniels has been terrific as a rookie quarterback. But the Eagles are just better on both sides of the ball. I don't see the Eagles stumbling here. I did not think the Eagles would go 15-2. And there's always the chance that, you can stumble, but this schedule, they navigated a lot of the hurdles that were out there. And now they're in a spot where they should win these next 3 games, and unless that week 18 game is meaningless for them or something like that. But even still, actually, it won't be meaningless if they win their next 2. So this is a way of saying that, I think the Eagles go down to Washington. I think they handle them. I think that the offense is going to move the ball against that defense. And I think the Eagles defense has earned the credibility to think that they're going to limit that Washington offense.
Zach Berman from PHLY. accomplished and successful author. He is a book reading connoisseur, husband, father. The man can do it all, and he does it all well. Hey, man, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me for this segment of Gun on One.
I don't just say this, D-Gun, anytime. If you ask, I'm there.
I appreciate you, brother, and I really do. And if you ever need anything, you just got to holler.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to wrap up this edition of Gun on One. Once again, empowered by the Inside the Birds Network. For Zach Berman, I'm Derrick Gunn. Hey, thank you for hanging out with us. We'll talk to you next week after the Eagles wrap up win number 11 in a row against the Washington Commanders. Until then, so long, everybody.